Hi, and welcome to the workshop. In this disc, we're going to be discussing everything that you need to know to work with masking. That is, all of the masking tools that you can apply to blend images together and make some of the best compositions possible within ProShow Producer. Now, keep in mind that masking is a producer-only feature, and because of that, we're going to be using Producer all the way through the disc. Now, to begin, we have to start with exactly what masking is. Traditionally, when working with masking, you may have seen it applied from a paint standpoint, and that is, you might take an image like this and apply a stencil to it, something similar to this snowflake that you see here. And masking was then used to create essentially an area that you would paint within. For example, if you were to imagine that this stencil acted as a block in the shape of a snowflake, you would paint or spray paint or whatever other application you might make around the snowflake and then simply peel the snowflake out of the way to reveal an unpainted area in this shape. Now that's the traditional application of masking. The modern digital application of masking is slightly different, but is basically used for the same effect. That is, masking controls what you can see of your images and what you don't see of your images. And it does this in a variety of ways that we're going to take a look at during the course of the material. Now, I'm going to start with a few examples just to illustrate exactly what kinds of things masking does. And then as we move on to different chapters, I'll be sure to let you know which ones are interactive and those that you can work along with me. So, let's begin by just demonstrating what you can do with a mask. For example, if I were to take this snowflake and I wanted to create an image that looked like it was in the shape of a snowflake, I could use a mask to do that. So, let's start with just something abstract, like this picture right here. If I create a new slide with this image, I'll open it up and I'll change it so that it fills up my entire slide frame. So I'll just change it to fill frame. And then I'll add the snowflake on top of it. So I'll drag and drop this right on top of the image. So now we can see that the white areas around the snowflake are transparent, which means that all we have here is the snowflake itself. Now if I open up the image and I convert this over to then become a mask, I can use, for example, an alpha mask. I'll enable the mask. You can see that it uses alpha or transparency. And then from there, if I click on OK, notice that all we can see of the image is what it shows within the snowflake. So that's a perfect example of the kinds of things that you can do with masking. Using a mask, I can control exactly what portion of that background abstract image that I see, and in this case, I see it only in the shape of a snowflake. Now, there are additional kinds of masks that we can work with. For example, we have a mask called a grayscale or intensity mask. An intensity mask works in a slightly different way, and what this does is it only reveals images based on light or dark values. So, there you can see that the white areas that are assigned to the snowflake are the only places where I can see the image, giving it sort of this subtle enhanced look. Now, grayscale masks work best when you have differences between light and dark values. So, for example, if I were to create a very simple gradient attached to this image, I can add a new gradient, and let's say that I set up the gradient to be just a simple difference like this, divide it between left and right, and then I create a mask out of this using intensity or grayscale. What we'll see now is the image on the left, and then it will fade out to the point that we can't see it on the right. And this allows me to do other creative things like bring in additional images to use with that mask. So for example, I can drop this image into the slide. And from here, if I move it beneath my masked section and then just increase the size of it so that it fills up the right side of the slide frame, now you can see that I've effectively blended two images together by making my topmost image invisible along the right edge, and then that allows me to see the image underneath it on the right side. So masking has a multitude of applications that allow you to blend images together in all sorts of creative ways. And there are a few rules that are associated with each different kind of mask, so while I'm moving quickly through the material here, as we begin to look at each individual mask type and understand how the feature works in more detail, you'll become far more comfortable with exactly what I'm putting together here. And we'll kick that off officially in the next chapter, where we begin showing exactly what kinds of masks we have, how they work, how you can turn them on and off, and what the basic rules behind them are. Here in Chapter 2, we're going to take a look at the two kinds of masks that we have available in the program, and we'll see two examples of how each mask type works. And as we put these together, we'll begin to learn exactly what the rules are behind each mask and how each mask functions. Now we're going to start with our first mask type, and that is intensity or grayscale masking. Now I like to refer to this mask type specifically as intensity because I think it does a great job of really describing how it works. To begin, I'm going to need a background image that's going to serve as the texture that will be used with my mask. The best image for this is this abstract parchment-looking image right here. And this is a point where you should feel free to follow along with me if you'd like to. To begin, we're going to drag and drop this background image into the slide to create a new slide. And let's start by simply configuring the background image before we go about making a mask. So I'll double-click on the slide to open the options. And I just want my background to fill up my entire slide frame, so I'll simply choose Fill Frame as my scaling option to make sure that I don't see any of my slide backdrop behind it. Now I'll click on OK. So, the catch to masks is that, again, they control visibility. And we're going to demonstrate our first mask type, grayscale or intensity masking, with this image combined with the background in the slide we just created. So to do this, let's select this image, Senior Portrait, and let's add it as a new layer to slide number 1. Hold down Control and drag and drop right on top of the slide. Now let's double-click on the slide to open the options, and let's begin configuring our mask. Now, mask configuration is done within the Layers and Layer Settings tab of your slide options. Here in about the middle left side, you can see a section called Masking Layer. Masking Layer is toggled on and off by clicking on the button next to the name. Now, the thing to remember about a mask is that in order for a mask to function, it has to attach itself to another image. Because a mask controls what is visible and what is not, if it's only by itself, then it can't actually determine what you can see and what you can't. It has to attach itself to at least one additional image layer. So let's begin by taking our picture of our senior portrait here, and let's convert this image into a mask. To do so, simply click on the Off button to toggle masking layer on. Now, by default, it's likely to select the intensity or grayscale mask type. And notice when it does this, it converts your image into black and white to get a better variance in dark and light tones in the image. There are a few other things to notice once we turn the mask or turn the image into a mask. Take a look at your layers list. Notice that it now has a badge on it indicating that it's a mask, and you see a link locking this image to the one underneath it. And the image underneath that is currently being masked has been indented to the right to indicate that it's now associated with this mask layer. This lets you know that the mask has attached itself to the image right beneath it, and this is always how masks work. If you convert a layer into a mask, it will automatically associate itself with the layer just beneath it. Now from here, there's a rule to remember about grayscale masking, and this is a hard and fast rule that you can rely on every single time. And the rule is this: dark conceals and light reveals. What this means is that the darker tones in a grayscale image will conceal the image that it's masking, so in this case it will hide the background, and the lighter areas, that is anything that's lighter in hue leading up to white, will reveal the image that it's masking. So, what I can do here is start by just increasing the size of my new mask image, this senior portrait. And why don't I just do something simple, like kind of place it down here in the lower left-hand corner like so. And all I did was just zoomed in. Now if I take a look at the image that's being masked, notice that what we see when we select it is basically a textured version of the image that we converted into a mask. Let's click on OK to close the slide options and take a look at how this actually appears in your slide preview. This gives you an accurate look at what the slide is going to appear as with the mask created. And notice there are a few things that stand out. All of the light areas that are part of this mask are showing the texture of our abstract background through the photo, like so. All of the dark areas, for example hair, edges of clothing, the darker skin tone, are hiding portions of the image, thus making it look like a textured version of the picture. So in this case, we've used an intensity mask to blend two images together. One image was a textured background, the other was a photo, And this has given us an artistic look at that same photo with an application of texture through the mask. Now let's take a look at another version of the same mask type. For this one, I'm going to select our abstract background right here. This is Abstract 02, and I'll drag this one down to create a new slide. And then I'll choose this bridal silhouette picture here, and I'll add this as a new layer to the same slide. Now, with that done, let's double-click on the slide to open the options. And let's begin by selecting our background image, layer number 2, and let's change the scaling for this once again to fill frame. Now let's choose our picture of the bridal silhouette in the foreground, and let's convert this to a mask. So once again, click the toggle button next to masking layer, and let's leave the mask type at intensity or grayscale. Now let's zoom in on the masked layer a bit, just to increase the size of it. And from there, we can get a brief preview of what this is going to look like just by clicking on the masked image. To get a full idea of what this is going to look like, click on OK and take a look at your slide preview. Here once again you can see that the darker areas of the image that has become the mask will hide our background texture. The lighter areas will reveal pieces of it, because remember that the rule for grayscale masking is that dark conceals and light reveals. So grayscale masking allows you to blend images together based on light and dark values within those images, and we'll see quite a bit more of how this works as we move through the workshop. Now let's take a look at our second mask type, which is an alpha or transparency mask. For this example, let's start with the same blue background that I used in Chapter 1, and let's create a new slide with this image. Then let's select that same snowflake again, and let's add this by holding Control and dropping it onto slide number 3. So now I have a snowflake that's transparent around the edges and my background image. What I'm going to do here is open the options for this slide. I'll select my background image, and I'll convert it once again to fill frame to make sure that it takes up my entire display area. Then I'm going to select the snowflake, and we're going to convert this layer into a mask. So we'll click on the toggle button next to masking layer, and this will then enable the mask, and notice that it's become an alpha or transparency mask. Now alpha masks have rules of their own, but they're slightly different from a grayscale or an intensity mask. Alpha masks do not care about values of color. They don't care about color, tone, hue, or any of those other attributes. The only thing that an alpha mask cares about is where it's located. So, as we can see, the snowflake is located right in the middle of the slide in the shape of a snowflake. And so because of that, the only places where the image is visible is where that snowflake is placed. Notice that if I drag the snowflake off to the right edge of the slide frame, the only place we can see the image is right there where the snowflake is positioned. So you can think of an alpha mask as acting essentially as a window. That is, it becomes a space that allows you to see the image it's masking through it. So it's much more fundamentally simple than what a grayscale mask does. An alpha mask simply says, where am I located? Wherever I am, you can see my masked image. Wherever I am not, you can't see my masked image. And that's all there is to it. Now, alpha mask can be used to do all sorts of interesting things, like create visible regions in a slide that doesn't already have them. So notice we have this picture of a projection screen. The screen itself is not transparent, but what if I wanted to display something within that screen, or at least make it appear as if something had been displayed there? This is the kind of place where an alpha mask becomes incredibly valuable. So I can drag and create a new slide, and then I'll open the options for this slide, and once again I'll change my scaling to fill frame so that my screen takes up most of the display area. With this done, I'm then going to bring in an image that I want to display inside the screen, and I can simply drop it just like so. Now, one of the ways that you might think about doing this without a mask is simply to reduce the size of the image and place it inside the screen. If I click on OK, that looks pretty convincing. But the catch is, if I try to add any kind of motion to this image, well, let's say I just wanted it to pan from left to right across the screen without going out of bounds, well, I don't have the ability to do that. Notice that it moves outside the boundary edges of the screen. There's nothing to constrain it in place, and that's where alpha masks become incredibly valuable. So what I can do is use an alpha mask to determine what I actually see. And there's an interesting trick to do this that I'll teach you how to do later on in the workshop. For now, just watch how I put this together. I'm going to add a new solid color layer, and I can have the color be whatever I want because alpha masks don't care about color. And with this solid color layer, I'm going to break the constraints of its proportions so that I can change it to be whatever size I want. And then I'm going to adjust and position it so that it fits within the screen display area, just like so. I'll then make sure that it stays that way from the beginning to the end of the slide. And then, in the Layers and Layer Settings tab, I'll convert this solid color layer into a mask and change my masking type to alpha. It has now attached itself to this image underneath it, and so I'll just keep the size of the image all the way at full size, and now take a look. The alpha mask has made sure that I can only see the image inside the screen. Because remember, as I said a moment ago, alpha masks essentially act as windows. That is, it says you can see the image wherever the alpha mask is located, which is right inside the screen, but you cannot see the image anywhere the mask is not located, which is everywhere else on the slide frame. So even if I were to add motion and other effects to the image that's being masked, it will never be visible outside of the mask range. Now, as we move on with the rest of the workshop, we'll begin taking more detailed looks at each mask type and give you some ideas of what you can. Moving on to Chapter 3, we're going to talk about exactly how you can use the alpha mask in a bit more detail than what we covered in Chapter 2. We're going to build 3 example slides, each of which makes use of the alpha mask channel in interesting ways. Our first example is going to be a combination of a background image, a custom shape, and this senior portrait picture. So let's start by creating our background. We'll simply drag and drop into the slide list to create a new slide. Next, let's add our senior portrait image by dragging this, holding Control, and dropping it on top of the slide. And then finally, let's bring in our custom shape, which we'll add by selecting, holding Control, and dropping on top of the slide. That'll also give you a better look at exactly what this shape looks like. Now, what we want to do with this example is display the senior portrait inside the custom shape over our notebook paper background. To do this, we're going to use an alpha mask. Now, if you recall from Chapter 2, an alpha mask only cares about its position. Since we have this custom shape that we've created, this will act as the mask which determines the position in which we can see the senior portrait. And this will all take place over the background, our picture of the notebook paper. So let's start by changing the scaling of our notebook paper to fill frame to fill up our entire slide display area. And then let's select layer number 1, which is our custom shape, and let's convert this into a masking layer by clicking on the toggle button next to masking layer. With this done, let's click on OK, and we have a complete slide. Notice that once you become comfortable working with your masking layers, it can be incredibly easy to make visual arrangements. We have our custom shape, which became a mask. It attached itself to our senior portrait, which is only revealed inside the mask area. Everywhere else, all we can see is our background. So it's a very short, very simple process to get this mask created. And remember again that the rule for alpha mask is it does not care about color or anything else. All it's concerned about is where it's located and what its shape is. Anywhere it's located, you can see its masked image. Anywhere it's not, you can't. Now let's make a second example. We'll use the black and white abstract background for this one. So we'll drag and drop this into the slide list. And then let's bring in this picture of this older gentleman, and we'll add this to the slide as well. So once again, hold down Control and drop it right on top of the slide we've created. Now for this example, we don't have a custom shape prepared to use with the photo. This means that we're going to need to make our own shape to act as our alpha mask. And this is where the features in Producer can be very, very useful. So what we're going to do here is start by opening the options for this slide, And as we've done in the past, I'm going to select the background first, and again change its scaling to fill frame so that it fills up my entire slide area. Now from here, we need to create the layer that's going to become our mask. One of the best things to use to create an alpha mask is a solid color layer, because they are a shape, they have definition, but color and all of the other attributes don't matter. So to do this, we'll click on Add New Layer and select Add Solid Color. Again, the color itself do not matter, so simply click on OK to create the new layer, and if it isn't already in the correct place, move it to the very top of your slide by using the up and down arrow icons. With this done, let's go ahead and now create a mask out of this layer. So make sure you have layer number 1 selected, and then toggle on the masking layer option. Make sure you change your mask type in the drop-down list to alpha or transparency, and now we've got our mask set up and ready to go. From here we need to position it and change its size so that we have something a little bit more visually interesting than simply allowing the entire picture of this older gentleman to be seen. So what we can do is start by reducing the size of this mask layer. Let's add a little bit of rotation to it by grabbing the rotation anchor point. Let's reduce it a little bit more and place it right about there. Now let's grab the picture of our gentleman, and why don't we adjust him over just a little bit like so. And here you can get a glimpse of how this mask is affecting the appearance of the slide. The mask layer only allows us to see the masked picture right there where you see it located. If we click on the picture that's being masked, we get a good visual sense of exactly what this is going to look like. If I click on OK, there you can see that we have an interesting visual composition and a complete slide using an alpha mask. Now we have one final example to put together, which does another job of demonstrating how flexible alpha masks can be. This slide is going to start with this particular abstract background. So let's select this one and drag it into the slide list. And now let's choose this senior portrait picture, and we'll add this to our new slide as well. So hold down Control, drag, and drop it right on top of the slide we've created. Now once again we're going to follow a similar process here. We'll double click on the slide to open the options, and then let's start by increasing the size of our background to fill the entire slide frame. So I'll choose Fill Frame for my scaling type. Now once again I'm going to need to create my own layer to act as a mask for this image, and once again solid color layers are perfect for this. Now here's a very useful shortcut for making your own masking layers. If you click on Add New Layer, notice that you have the option to add masking layer. Here you can choose all kinds of different layer types that you want to make as a mask. In our case, we're interested in adding a solid color. So we'll choose Add Solid Color. Notice that this follows the same basic process to create a solid color. That is, we can choose the color, the size, and other attributes. Simply click on OK. But notice that selecting Add Masking Layer automatically creates our new solid color layer into a mask and grabs the image underneath it. Just make sure when you use this method that your mask type is set to the correct type. In this case, we want an alpha mask. Now with that done, let's change the appearance of our masking layer to make it a little bit softer and make it blend in with our background. So to do this, first I'm going to place the layer where I want it to appear. I'm just going to move it and place it slightly offset to the right on our image layer here. And now, to soften the edges of it, I'm going to add a vignette to the masking layer. So I can go to the Editing tab, and with layer number 1, my mask selected, I can click on the Vignette option. This brings up the Vignette Creation window, and here I can add a soft border to the outside edge of my masking layer. I'll change my vignette size to about 40% and leave my shape and my type at rounded rectangle and transparent. Click on OK, and notice that it's blended and softened the outer edges of the vignette. Now let's just adjust the placement and position of our image to take full advantage of this softer vignette. With that done, click on OK, and now you can see how the blended alpha mask is softened and blurred into our actual background. So the point of this is that alpha masks are incredibly flexible, allowing you to apply the same kinds of effects that you would apply to any other layer, whether that's motion or any sort of adjustments, anything like that can be applied to the mask, which will ultimately determine what the mask reveals of the image it's associated with. So that's a look at the alpha mask. Moving on to our next chapter, we'll do the same in-depth look at our other mask type, the intensity mask. Now that we've reached chapter 4, we're going to make some more detailed analysis of the intensity mask type. Before we begin, I'd like you to always keep in mind the basic rule of working with an intensity mask, and that rule again is that dark conceals and light reveals. So remember that dark areas of your photo, such as the middle of this image between the buildings, will conceal the image that it's being masked with. And light images, such as these bright pinpoints of light along the edges of the building, will reveal images that it's masked with. So, again, we're going to create 3 examples to get a sense of how this works. Let's get started with our first. This example is going to combine this image of a student in water fountains to create our slide. So go ahead and drag and drop that image into your slide list. And it's going to mask together with this picture of our city lights. So hold down Control and then drop that layer right on top of the slide. Now let's begin by opening the options for this slide, and let's increase the size of our water fountains image to fill up our slide viewing area. Let's start by just changing this slide to fill frame. This will increase the size of it so that it takes up our entire slide area. Let's also select our city lights image, and let's do the same thing with this. Change its scaling to fill frame. Now with this done, we're going to convert our city lights image into a mask associated with the water fountain. So select layer number 1 and then toggle masking layer on. Notice that we should have an intensity mask type already chosen. Let's take a look at what this shows us. Now, here all we can see, as I pointed out before, are the pictures of the student in the water fountain in only the lightest areas of the photo. This means that you might consider this photo not to be suitable for using as a mask of this type, simply because it's so dark that for the most part it hides most of the image you want to see. But there's a very useful little trick that you can use with masks that you may have noticed earlier when we were doing the introduction. If I open the options for this slide once again, I can select my masking layer and then check the box next to the mask type for invert. Notice that when I do this, it inverts the light and dark values that are visible on the image so that now the dark becomes the light and vice versa. This reverses the rules associated with the image, so now we can see most of the photo that it's being masked with and not much in the way of the buildings. They become more of an accent to the image, and that's done simply by inverting the mask. Now let's make another version of this same comparison. Let's create another slide, once again with the water fountain. Let's then also add in the city lights on top of it, so hold down Control and drop them on top. But this time we're going to add a third image layer, which is this background of bright yellow. Let's drag and drop this as a new layer onto our second slide. With this complete, double-click on the slide to open the options, and let's start by moving our yellow image all the way to the bottom of the slide list and changing its scaling to fill frame. Let's also change the scaling for layers 2 and for layer 1. Now with that done, we're ready to create our mask. So to do this, I'm going to select my city lights image, convert it into a mask, and then remember to invert it to give us more of a view of that background. Now if I click on OK, notice what's happening here. In an interesting change, we can see the waterfall image behind it, but that yellow background is also showing through, revealing certain portions of the buildings. Now this works because the city lights are showing any of the water fountain regions within their light areas, But because our yellow background is not part of the mask, this is also showing through in the places that the water fountain's image is being hidden. So this causes it to look like a much lighter and different effect. So you can see how this changes the look of things. The other nice thing about this is you can use them in combination with one another just to make an interesting visual effect as part of your show. Now we have one final example to illustrate the kinds of things that you can do with a grayscale mask. For this example, we're going to start with this picture of stained glass. So find this in your slide list and drag and drop to create a new slide. Then we're going to find this picture of this brand new kiddo, and we're going to drag this in as a new layer. So hold down Control and drop it right on top of the slide. Now with this done, let's double click on the slide to open the options, and let's change the scaling of layer number 1 to fill frame, just to increase the size of it a little bit. Now we're going to convert the picture of the newborn into a mask. So check your masking option and leave the option set to intensity or grayscale. Now take a look at how this is going to work. All of the dark black areas are going to hide the stained glass, and all of these lighter gray tones throughout the newborn are going to reveal the stained glass. And what we get is this incredibly interesting image, just like this. This sort of thing works very well together, and this is a surprisingly intense composition that's made just by turning masking on. So masking can be an incredibly powerful and incredibly valuable part of the tools that you use to make your show. It's just a matter of what images you select and how you use them together. Now, we've taken a more detailed look at both of our mask types. We're going to begin from here constructing examples using these mask types just to help you better understand what they do, how they work, and to give you some ideas of exactly how you can implement masks in your own shows. Moving on to Chapter 5, we're going to begin looking at some interesting visual comparisons that you can make using grayscale or intensity masking. This is a perfect tool to combine multiple images together to do all sorts of interesting visual effects. So what we're going to do here are another 3 examples that really give you a firm grasp of the kinds of things that you can create using intensity or grayscale masking. So let's get started with our first image. And that's going to be this picture of the bride and groom right here. Let's drag and drop this into the slide list to get us set up with a new slide. Now, let's also choose this second picture of the groom, and let's add this as a new layer to the slide. So remember to hold down Control and then drag and drop it right into place. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 images and we're going to blend them together so that we can see both the bride and the groom in 2 different photos in part of the same slide. Now to begin, I'm going to change the scaling of layer number 2 to fill frame. With this done, I've now got the basis I need to get my mask set up and put into place. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use a gradient, and that's a gradient of light to dark, no color needed, to create our blend between these 2 images. Now you saw me do this briefly in Chapter 1 as I was introducing the feature. Now you're going to learn how to do it yourself. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add in a new layer, and this time we're going to add a masking layer. We want this masking layer to be a gradient. So select Add Gradient. Now remember the fundamental rule of grayscale masking. That is, dark conceals and light reveals. So what you have to keep in mind is how your images are arranged. Notice that we're going to be adding a mask to the picture of the groom on top, and the groom is on the right side. So that means that we want to reveal the groom on the right. So we need to make sure that our gradient has the white area on the right side. I can do this by adjusting the angle of my gradient to see the white just there on the right edge. Since this is almost a straight up and down comparison, I can use an angle of 180 degrees to reveal the image on the right and conceal it on the left, allowing me to blend it into the picture of the bride. Let's go ahead and click on OK and see how this works. Here we can see that it's automatically made a mask. We can check the type to make sure it's using the right kind of mask. Then we can click on a picture of the bride and groom and see how they're blended together. If I click on OK, there you can see that they're very nicely added together as part of the same composition. So rather than there being a hard edge between the two of them, it looks almost as if the groom is leaning on the edge of the wall there. Now you can take this a step further by adding a little bit of motion to create a great sense of visual depth. Watch this. What I'm going to do here is take a picture and zoom in while the other zooms out. So let's say for the picture of my groom in the Effects and Motion Effects tab, I'm going to zoom in on the groom very slightly in the ending position. I zoomed in no more than about 10%. And for the bride in the ending position, layer number 3, I'm going to zoom out. Now if you don't want to reveal the slide background, then what you can do to get around this is just increase the zoom value of the image of the bride a little bit in the starting position so that you can decrease it effectively in the ending position. So I'm going from 115% to 100%. With this done, I can click on OK and watch what kind of visual depth is created by having this alternating zoom. One zooms toward us, the other zooms away from us. And you get this very interesting sense of depth. Now, as another comparison, why don't we take the picture of someone toward the end of their life and someone right at the beginning of their life. And let's compare them together on the same slide. Let's start by adding the newborn to the slide. Simply drag and drop that into the slide frame. And then let's add the picture of this older gentleman by holding Control and dropping him right on top. Now, once again, we're going to make a similar comparison between the two images. So we'll open up the slide options and let's begin in the Layers and Layer Settings tab. Here, I'm going to start by reducing the size of these image layers a bit down to 70%. I'm going to place the newborn on the left. I'll do the same for the gentleman and place him on the right, just like so. Now, I want to blend these two together. This time we're going to switch it up a little bit. I'm going to put the gentleman on the right on the bottom and have the newborn on the left on the top. So this time, to blend them together, I'm going to need the gradient to be oriented the other direction. So we're going to add the mask to our newborn. With the newborn selected, click on Add Layer, choose Add Masking Layer, and then select Add Gradient. Now remember that this time the image that we're masking is on the left side of the slide, so we want the white area to also be on the left. So for that, I can adjust my angle to 360 degrees so that light reveals on the left side and dark conceals on the right side. Click on OK, the mask is added, and let's see how it blends these two together. It looks like it might be pretty good right there. With that done, once again, we can use the same contrasting zoom values to make an interesting visual effect. I can go back to my Effects and Motion Effects tab, and starting with the image of the newborn, I'll zoom the newborn away from us, and then I'll select the gentleman, and in the ending position, I'll zoom the gentleman toward us. Just like so. With that done, if we play this slide back, we can see the difference in the two. Now, just to verify we've got those zoom settings correct, zoom in there and zoom out there. All right. With that played back, now you get a better sense of the transition between the two. So we have one final example to put together as part of this chapter. And in this one, we're going to blend our green bridesmaid in her photo together with this picture of the group of bridesmaids. So let's start by adding the group of bridesmaids to a new slide. And with this done, let's add in our single bridesmaid to the top of it by holding Control and dropping right into the slide. Now we have a slight angle to the blend here. What we want to do with this one is blend the two photos together along the edge of the green bridesmaid's back. So to do this, let's start first by setting the green bridesmaid to fill frame. And let's do the same with our many bridesmaids. Now that they fill up the slide frame, let's go in and add our mask. Remember that once again we want to reveal the left side of the photo with a cut in the gradient right along her back at an angle. So, let's add a new layer, choose Add Masking Layer, and then select Add Gradient. Now this gradient looks like it might actually do the trick without any kind of an angle adjustment. That's pretty close to what we want. Now one of the nice things that you can do with a gradient, in addition to changing its angle, is you can change the amount of blur between the two colors by adjusting the color stays. So I can select them and push the difference between the two dark and light colors back a little bit to give myself more room for that angle. With that done, click on OK. The mask is created, and if I click on the image, you can see that that's a pretty clean blend of the two together. We take a look at that in the slide preview. Now we can see that we can very clearly see both of them. You can also make adjustments. For example, if you wanted to see more of the bridesmaids, we can pull this over to the right side of the slide and zoom in on it some. That gives us a much stronger look at the bridesmaids themselves. If I click on OK, you can see that there. And then with this done, we can just add a little bit of motion for the same kind of contrast. So, let's go to the Effects tab, and starting with our single bridesmaid, let's zoom that toward us just a little bit, no more than about 15%. And then for the many bridesmaids, let's zoom them away from us just a little bit as well. With that done, we can play the slide back and see the contrast in the motion. So this is a very common but powerful use of grayscale masking. That is the ability to blend images together within the slide to make these kinds of interesting contrasts and comparisons. Moving on, we're going to take a look at some alpha mask examples and get a good sense of some of the more advanced things you can do once you really get masks under control. Now here in Chapter 6, we're going to focus in on some more interesting applications of the alpha mask once again. This one is all about using a picture grid, which is a prepared image that we have right here, and we're going to use this in combination with images to show you what kinds of interesting things you can do with alpha masks and multiple images. Now let's start off with something really straightforward. I'm going to begin with a picture of this mother and her daughter right here, and we're going to add this to a new slide. With this established, let's go ahead and bring in our picture grid, and we'll add this as a new layer to the slide we just created. So once again, hold down Control and drop it right on top of the slide frame. Now, as it is, the grid actually blocks out our view of the mother and her daughter, but remember that when we convert this into an alpha mask, each one of these squares will be where we can see the mother, and everything else will be blocked out. So let's get that set up now. Double-click on the slide to open the options and make your way to the Layers and Layer Settings tab. Here, let's select our grid image, and we're going to convert this into a masking layer. Now, Producer automatically knows to convert this into an alpha mask because this image has transparency in it, and any image that has transparency will be used as an alpha mask. Now, with that set, let's select the picture of our mother and daughter and just increase the size of them a little bit so that they fill up the viewing area inside the grid. If you wanted to offset this just a little bit more, we can click on the Effects tab and we can just add some motion effects to this. Perhaps in the ending position we'll add a little bit of rotation and just a bit of zoom. With that done, if we play this slide back, we can see that the grid constrains exactly where we see the mother and daughter, and we can add motion to it without that view changing. Now, let's do this just a little bit differently, and let's add in some visuals to make this example a bit more distinct. So, we'll start with a background. Let's use this abstract backdrop, and let's drop this into the slide list just like so. Now this time around, we're not going to change the size of it. Let's leave those letterbox bars at the top and bottom. Next, let's find the image of our mother and daughter once again, and let's add them to the slide. So hold down Control and drag and drop them into the slide just like this. And then let's bring the grid in as our final layer. So once again, hold down Control and drop it on top of the slide. Now, we've put enough there that we can no longer see our backdrop, but watch what happens when we get this alpha mask layer configured. Let's double-click on the slide to open it up, and let's start in the Layers and Layer Settings tabs. Here, begin with the grid, and let's reduce the size of the grid so that it fits within the background. I dropped it down to about 70%. Now with that done, let's convert the grid into a masking layer so that it grabs the picture of the mother and child underneath it. With that done, click on OK, and now you can see that we have this really interesting composition where the grid reveals the picture of the mother and daughter, and everywhere else we can see both the backdrop that we added in and the final background of the slide as those black bars on the top and bottom. So you can have these very interesting compositions that don't require much effort, but masks make them very easy to create for you. Now we have one final example to create here, and this one is going to show you how you can use multiple images within a mask and then combine them together to make something that's greater than its individual parts. For this, we're going to need two images. We'll use Dancing at Dusk, so let's drag and drop this into the slide list to create a new slide, and then let's find the side-by-side bride and groom, and let's add them to the slide that we just created. So hold down Control and drop that into the slide list. And then finally, let's grab our grid, and we'll put this right down on top of it. So once again, hold down Control and drop it right on top. Now, we're going to display two images inside our grid mask and then reveal the background everywhere else. For this particular slide, we're going to change our background color to white. So let's start with that. Double-click on the slide to open the options, then choose the Slide tab and finally the Background tab. Let's override the Show Background for this particular slide. Click on Set, and we'll change our color to white. Now with that done, we're ready to begin arranging our layers and setting up our mask. So let's go to the Layers tab, and let's start by establishing Grid as an alpha mask. So select the grid from the Layers list, and then toggle masking on. Let's leave the mask type at alpha transparency, but now we're going to do something a little different by adding Dancing at Dusk to the mask. And this can be done simply by clicking on the right arrow icon with this layer selected. That's going to indent it over so that it becomes part of the same mask. Now we have two images within one mask. Creating the visual effect for this is just a matter of lining them up on the slide. So I'll select layer number 2, and let's position this one so that it bumps up right against the right edge of our slide. Oops. And that's something that I can point out there. If you happen to double click on your preview window, notice that this opens up your precision preview. It's just a larger version that allows you to see what you're doing. And you can occasionally open that up by accidentally double clicking. So I'm going to arrange my image and zoom in the size of it a bit so that I can place it just like so, perhaps a little bit less there, inside the grid. Then I'm going to take my Dancing at Dusk image, and I'm going to pull this over to the right and again zoom in on it a bit so that I can see it just like so. Now, how do these two layers blend together? Why does this work? Well, if I click on OK, notice that you can see one image on the left and the other image on the right. It works because the first image side by side is on top of Dancing at Dusk as part of your mask stack. What this means is that even though they're part of the same mask, side by side is still on top, which means that wherever you can see layer number 2, it's going to obscure your view of layer number 3. So that allows me to see both of them within the same slide. Now, to make things a little bit more visually interesting, we can add a little bit of opposing vertical motion. I can go into my Effects tab, and starting with layer number 2, why don't we move layer number 2 down? And then let's select layer number 3, and why don't we move layer number 3 up? Just like so. With that done, if I play it back, you can see one layer moves down and the other layer moves up, just for a little interesting visual comparison there. Now, the example show that comes packaged with Chapter 6 contains some additional and more advanced examples that you can take a look at, deconstruct, and figure out exactly how to create. So that once you become comfortable working with alpha masks on the level that we've done here, you can begin working on those more advanced examples to see what kinds of things you can begin creating. For the last chapter on our disc, we're going to talk about something that we call the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect uses masks to create the illusion of a light source moving around on a slide. Now, you can use a light source in total darkness, as we're going to do with our first example. You can use it to blend multiple images together, or you can use it as you see occasionally in news programs or documentaries, where a light shows up over a dim image to reveal some important detail about it. Let's start with the spotlight in total darkness. To do this, we're going to start with the image of our mother and child here, and we'll drag and drop this image into the slide list to create a new slide. Now let's double-click on the slide to open the slide options, and let's make our way to the Layers and Layer Settings tab. Here, let's change the scaling of our image to fill frame, and now we're going to create a spotlight by using a grayscale mask. Let me show you how this works. We're going to add a new layer, choose Add Masking Layer, and we're going to add a gradient. Now, when you think of a spotlight, you think of a round light source. Obviously, a linear mask is not going to get the job done for you. What we're looking for is a radial mask, something that looks very precisely like a point of light. This should do the job almost perfectly, because remember, dark conceals and light reveals. What this means is that our light area will act as where the light shines, and it will be dark everywhere else. Click on OK, and our mask is now created. If we just click OK and close the slide options, here we can see we've made a circular viewport to see just the image. To make the spotlight effect really work, though, what we need is a bit of motion. So let's double-click on the slide and go into the Effects and Motion Effects tab. Here, all we need to do is move our spotlight, not the image. So let's start with our spotlight in the upper left-hand corner of the image, and in the ending position, let's have it move down to the lower right-hand corner. If I click on OK, we play this back, you can see the spotlight move across the image, revealing it as it goes. So that's working with the spotlight in total darkness. Let's work with a spotlight now that blends images together. Let's start with this picture of a city scene here. I'm going to drag and drop this into my slide list to create a new slide. And then I'll pick this group of groomsmen here, and I'm going to add them as a new layer to the existing slide. So I'll hold down Control and drop it right on top of slide number 2. With this done, let's double-click to open the slide options. And to begin, we'll go to the Layers and Layer Settings tab, where I'm going to change the city scene to Fill Frame so that it fills up my entire slide display area. And I'll leave the groomsmen just as they are. Now, once again, we need a spotlight here, so let's click on the Add New Layer icon, choose Add Masking Layer, and once again, add Gradient. We need a radial gradient for this. We can use the same kind of good solid spotlight effect and click on OK. Now we have our spotlight, and where it doesn't reveal the groomsmen, notice that it reveals our background image. So with this done, now we can just add a little bit of motion to the effect to get this great looking blended image. So in the Effects and Motion Effects tab, I'll start with my spotlight over on the right edge of the slide, and let's end with it over on the left edge, just like so. With that done, click on OK, and if we play the effect back, we can see the spotlight reveal our groomsmen as it moves across the slide. Now for our final example, we're going to see how to create a spotlight using an alpha mask rather than a grayscale mask, and for this one, we're going to use a dim version of the same image. So, let's take this image of our bridesmaids here. Let's create a new slide with this image. And then I'm going to add that same image to the slide. So I'm just going to drag and drop it right back onto the slide frame for 2 exact versions of the same image. Now I'll double click on the slide to open my slide options, and let's begin by going to the Layers and Layer Settings tab. Now the way I want this to work is I want the mask to reveal a fully lit version of my image, and everywhere else where the mask is not located, I want the image to be dim. Well, since we're going to associate the image with layer number 1, that means that I need to darken down layer number 2. I can do this most easily by going to the Editing tab and changing the opacity for this layer to 50%. That's going to allow more of the black background to show through, which is going to give that layer the illusion of being darker. With that done, now I can select layer 1 and I can add my new masking layer. Remember that this time we're going to use an alpha or transparency mask to create our spotlight. To do this, I'm going to click on Add New Layer. I'm going to select Add Masking Layer, and because we're using an alpha mask, we're going to add solid color. Click on Add Solid Color, and now because we want to make a perfect circle to create our spotlight, I need to start with a perfect square. So I'm going to change the resolution of my solid color layer to 600 by 600. That gives me a perfect square to work with. With that done, click on OK, and now I have my new masking layer in place. So what I have to do at this point is somehow get my square to become a circle. And this is where a little visual trick comes in. Once again, I'm going to add a vignette to my solid color layer. So we can click on the vignette icon, and here I'm going to change my shape to an ellipse. Now the funny thing is that to make an ellipse, you have to have a rectangle to work with. If you're constrained to a square, then your ellipse becomes a perfect circle. And that works out rather well for us. To make the light effect look softer along the outside edge, let's just soften our vignette down to about 45% and then click on OK. Notice that we now have that soft look that a light source might have. If I click on OK, you can see the difference. The dim version of the image is visible everywhere the spotlight is not currently located. So now, with just a little bit of motion, we can have our spotlight effect. So let's go into the Effects and Motion Effects tab. And let's start with our mask in the upper left corner of the slide, and then let's simply move it down to the lower right corner. Click on OK, and now we can watch our lit version pass over the image just like you might expect from a light source. So there you have it. Two different ways to make a spotlight using both mask types we have available. One involves creating an intensity mask with a radial gradient, and the other involves creating a solid color layer alpha mask with a vignette applied to it to make it look like a circle. There are also some additional and more advanced versions of each one of these spotlight effects included with the demo show for Chapter 7, so feel free to take a look at that and start recreating the effects that you see there once you become comfortable with what I've demonstrated for you here. I hope you've learned quite a bit about the masking feature in this workshop, and I hope you find that it allows you to make better shows that are far more visually interesting than you were creating before you understood how to use the program. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to talk to us at Photodex. And if you need any more learning with any other sections of the program, please look at our other workshop discs.